Yes, friends. On a Friday, it is, of course, OGP, the One Giant podcast, where you know it. We are your host over there, Andy Makowitz. Over here, Adam Armbrecht, generational season ticket holder over there, host of the Locked On Nets podcast on the Locked On Podcast Network over here. It's Friday, man. So we're going to go ahead and get expansive, sir. But how are we feeling? On the mend, 24 hours later, you feel as good as you ever had.
I'm still working through things, Adam, but I'm trying to get better for the weekend. Man, nothing is worse than being sick when it comes to the weekend. Like, you work all week and then all of a sudden you're supposed to enjoy your time. And here we sit, still not doing well. It's supposed to be 94 degrees tomorrow on Saturday. Unbelievable weather is supposed to be kicking in. What is happening?
Pros Pro, who, when asked how he's doing, opens with a cough. I think that sends the message, makes it very clear, and we'll just clean that up in post. It's no big deal. Listen, all week long we've been talking obviously about the OTAs. We've had those last couple of days really having discussions around some back end guys. Some roster moves have been made. We're starting, I think, to see, as Joe Schoen mentioned, by the way, right? He said this at the start of the offseason, during the draft, post-draft, during undrafted free agency when they were bringing in some players, and as he got into rookie minicamp, et cetera. He said, we're not done, right? This process for us is going to be continual throughout the entire offseason. He's staying true to that. So before we dive in on the topic of the day, which is going to be looking at this roster for the building block cornerstone pieces on both sides of the ball, do you think that, again, it's another great example of Joe Schoen, for better or worse, being honest about what it looks like for him in his first year as the Giants GM?
I do. I mean, look, he has been transparent about everything that he's wanted to do. He said this is going to be a multi-year rebuild. He said he didn't want to kick the can down the road and restructure things. He's basically meant everything that he said, and he's followed through with actions. You look at, we mentioned yesterday about the James Bradbury piece. Obviously, his contract made it so that the Giants couldn't keep him anymore. You know, old regimes would have restructured it, kicked the can down the road and said, we'll live to fight another day. Joe Schoen is saying, no, I need to get this clean. So when we look forward in 2023 and we have the core pieces here, we have those building blocks in the building, then it's about getting the complementary pieces, and we have the cap space to do it.
100%. So we thought it'd be a good one here. We weren't sure which direction we were going to go. We noodled around on it. We batted it back and forth, and we ultimately came to building blocks, right? We're in this off season. We know that there's a lot of change, a lot of turnover, and a lot of questions to be answered over the course of the upcoming season. But as we stand right now, I think this was a good way to maybe address some of the lower level back end of the roster players that fans or we are debating and hoping that they can be a part of this, but also addressing, who do you see moving forward on both sides of the ball? 3-4 years from now, what are the handful of players that you expect to have been built around with complementary pieces so the Giants can be back to being competitive? Dealer's choice. You want to go offense or defense to start this conversation?
Well, let me just frame things a little bit. And the reason why we wanted to talk about this was because we've gotten pushback on our just overall sentiments of guys like Julian Love and Darius Slayton, where everyone's like, no, you got to keep them. You know, they're working hard. They could be a part of this roster moving forward. We talked about a signing that the Giants had 2 days ago. Safety Henry Black is a perfect example of this. Right. You may look at Henry Black and you're like, who is this guy? Oh, did you know that, the Green Bay Packers had the number 1 seed, and this guy played in all 18 games for the Green Bay Packers? He was just a guy for the Green Bay Packers, and they realized they need to get better at certain areas. Henry Black is a guy that can contribute, but he's also replaceable. And so I think what we were realizing when we were kicking back and forth after the show yesterday was, well, look, I don't understand why everyone's so upset about us calling out Julian Love. Like, we just want to be better overall. Is he a building block? And then it's like, aha, let's think about actually who are the building blocks. Is there 1, 2, 5 on each side of the ball? Like, I think it's good for us to kind of come to a consensus overall with listeners as well. Who are the guys that are going to be here long-term? Because if they're not, then they're just a guy on the roster, and we're going to be replacing them and churning them over next year.
Yeah, and certainly the balance between having talent on the roster in the short term and then building for the future, right? We can't just take everybody off the roster that isn't going to be here in 5 years, because you may not have much of a roster, as we'll get into here in a second. But it is also the opportunity for young players, bring guys in, bring someone in like Black, let them compete, let him have a good year or two. But no, do we look at him and say, there's a guy that will be playing here for the next 5 to 7 years? Not necessarily. So let's start on the defensive side of the ball, actually, with that in mind, because we know there's a lot of questions there, I think, The secondary has a lot of obviously opportunity for turnover. So there's a linebacking core. The top of the edge rushing class may be where we want it for the future, but what about everyone in there and behind it? So when we run through this and we're thinking about just looking at obviously Dexter Lawrence, Leonard Williams, Thibodeaux drafted this year, right? Tate Crowder, Blake Martinez, Azeez Ojulari, Xavier McKinney, Cordell Flott, Julian Love, Adoree Jackson. That's the rundown of the starters on this team. I guess you throw in Ward or Nico Lelos, depending on which way you want to go. There's that group of players, and you can include obviously some guys in behind them there from a depth perspective and young talent. But give me, we'll take Thibodeaux right off there, right? He's a cornerstone piece. That's obvious. If you're drafted high in the draft class, you have to be. If we automatically assumed Azeez Ojulari because we think that the talent level is there, is that something that we both agree on? Those are two cornerstone pieces, building blocks for the future, or do you push back on? I would assume Azeez.
Well, let me ask you a question about the definition of building block for this exercise. Is
All
it
right.
is it a player that you anticipate being a contributor on a playoff team 2 years from now? Like what is your definition of a building block player so that we make sure that we're in agreement on what that means for that player?
All right, sure. Well, listen, the Thibodeaux one is self-explanatory, right? High draft, you something to be there. Second contract, right? That's probably that tells you enough because even Azeez Ojulari coming into his second year, well, that means he has 2 more to go plus the next contract, right? So you want multiple contract guys that you believe are going to be here now for the rebuild, and then to your point, they are going to be there contributing for playoff football for the New York Football Giants. And I'm not saying it's going to take 4 years to get there, but over the next 2, 3, 4 years and beyond, these players will be a part of what the Giants accomplish.
Yeah, so I think, Azeez Ojulari showed flashes. He seems like a guy that's going to be a perfect complement to Kayvon Thibodeaux. I think we can both agree that those two guys seem like if the Giants are going to be in play to make the playoffs in 2 years from now, those two guys are going to be front and center of what the Giants are trying to do. So I think we're in agreement there.
Yeah.
I think I think the third one that we could probably agree on is that Xavier McKinney, the way that he's progressed, is going to be here as a cornerstone. Now, the challenge that I have is that I don't like paying safeties a second contract. So that's a really big challenge for me. So the definition of saying that he's a building block is difficult. But if you're talking about paying a 24, 25-year-old safety that has versatility, as opposed to in the box thumping safety that may lose speed or lose some of that athleticism, it's a little different for me.
Yeah, I think so. Xavier McKinney, I think what we're going to see here when we talk about these building blocks is, and right. So, like those top 2 guys, I think we already agree they're in there, lock them in. And Xavier McKinney, to your point, you're going to be paying a safety in another couple of years, some really big dollars. It's totally worth it. And I think what you need to see him do is build off of last year and cement himself, right? Make himself one of the top 2 or 3 safeties in the league, and then you justify it. Because if not, then I think based on position, you could see the Giants in the grand scheme of things say, well, we can get younger through the draft. We can spend another second round draft pick maybe. Now, as the Giants get better, the draft picks get a little bit lower on round to round. And so the value gets a little bit more difficult to find. But I think he just needs to affirm that he is the guy at that position, that he can anchor Wink Martindale's defense, right? That he can be the field general for them because there is a reason why you draft a Dane Belton, right? There is a reason why you take a look at a Yusuf Corker. I'm not saying those guys are anywhere near the talent level of Xavier McKinney, but they could be, serviceable, functional inside of this system in another 2 years. So I put him fringe, right? I say 80-20. I'm 80-20 that he is a building block. And I think when we get to our next one here, it may go the other way between you and I as far as which way you think it is, and that's going to be Dexter Lawrence, right? Here's another guy, a holdover, a first round draft pick. The speculation that he may end up back inside at nose tackle in Wink Martindale's system. Is he a building block guy for you?
He isn't. I don't think that he's going to be someone that's on this roster long term, but he's someone that has value in the interim.
Mhm.
Like the Giants signed him on a 1-year deal. He's on a short contract. He is young talent. And also, like if you think about it, if he plays pretty well, the Giants have the ability to either franchise tag him or get a compensation pick if he goes and signs elsewhere. So for me, it's a good situation where he's a good player, not a spectacular player. He fills a role, he fills an area of need. But longer term, is he here in 2 or 3 years? I have my doubts about whether or not Dexter Lawrence is here.
And I pretty much I think I put him in the same category as Xavier McKinney. Like I'll put him on an 80-20, right? If he does the things that you need him to do this year, then you start to line yourself up for that second contract. And then you're a part of that process of helping the Giants win playoff games on what will be, an 8 to 10 year career with the New York Football Giants. But it will be predicated on how successful do things look when you now have some more pieces around you defensively that hopefully allow you to have a greater level of success. And again, to your point, man, like these are both holdover players. And I think that something about this conversation that's going to upset Giants fans in some ways is these are some of the more talented players on the roster, and they might not necessarily be the most important pieces when we talk about 2 or 3 years down the line. And that's a part of this process as a GM, turning over that roster and thinking a few years ahead of schedule.
So the next two players I wanted to put together, which I think will round out the defensive side of the ball, I put them together because they're in a very similar situation for the New York Football Giants,
I know who
and
you're doing.
that would be Adoree Jackson and Leonard Williams.
Yep.
And the reason why they go hand in hand is because they're in a very similar situation where they have 2 years left on their deal, right? Leonard Williams is 27 turning 28. Adoree Jackson is 26 turning 27. They are both high contributors right now. If I said to you, which way would you rather answer this? Which one is more likely to be on the roster at the end of their contract? Or which one do you think the Giants should be building around if they are on the roster long term?
Oh, well, that's interesting, right? So if you're saying if you're building long term, I think the answer is Leonard Williams, right? Because he can have that impact on that side of the ball. What's ironic is that if the team overall is at position X in their rebuild, when you talk about 27, 28, 29-year-old Adoree Jackson, will he be worth keeping if you think, hey, we just made the playoffs the year prior, we think that we can win a few more rounds, right? Have you drafted in behind them? Cornerback is an interesting one where because he wasn't a draft pick from the Giants, let alone a signing from this regime of the Giants, I think that you could see turnover there. But out of the two, I would think the one that's more of a building block is Leonard Williams. The one that might be more likely to be here, though, is Adoree Jackson, because I think in time, and this goes hand in hand with Dexter Lawrence, if Lawrence looks good and you can start to prepare for the future beyond Leonard Williams, what kind of contract are you going to give him, right? There's some big money allocated there. I think that it'd be more likely that he plays out his contract and gets another big deal somewhere else. Whereas with Adoree Jackson, it might be the sweet spot. Is he going to be upper echelon, the true elite number one cornerback? Or could you get a little bit of value on a 3-year deal to make sure that he's there in support of whoever you're starting, ultimately number one corner is on the other side?
So I actually would flip it, in my opinion. I think that Leonard Williams might be more likely to be here long term, but I actually think Adoree Jackson is more valuable. And the reason why I say that, and it might be surprising to some Giant fans, is because more about Wink Martindale than anything else. Because Wink Martindale wants to play man to man press coverage on the outside. If you don't have a cornerback that can do that on your roster, it throws out all the things that he wants to do from a creative scheme. You feel like, while I know that Wink has had people like Calais Campbell on that line to be able to wreak havoc with the Baltimore Ravens, it feels like getting a nose tackle or someone on the defensive line seems to be a little bit easier to replace for 80 cents on the dollar than a press man coverage man-to-man guy who's 28 years old, still has 2 or 3 good years left in him before he hits over that 30 mark, which is what Adoree Jackson would be. So for me, I think it's more about Wink Martindale and what the defense wants to do rather than who I think has a better overall football skill set to make impacts.
Sure. And so, okay, and do you think that either one of them is here on a second contract?
I think Adoree Jackson might be that guy. If Wink Martindale sees him this year and is like, he is a shutdown corner, he helps me do whatever I want, I could see them after this season extending him a year early to say, let's not have him on the last year of his deal. Let's get him on a 2,
get him at 30 for an extra couple of years.
Right. He's 26 right now. By the end of the year, he'd be 27 and a half. If you sign him to a 2-year extension,
right, be done with him at 30, not at 31, maybe getting a little bit long in the tooth. Yeah, listen, that can make sense. And I wonder, it'll be interesting to see what happens with Leonard Williams, as you say. And some of this, it happens in tandem, right? How does he look now with Thibodeaux and, and some of these other pieces here, year number 2 for Azeez Ojulari. So, and how does the team look? And this is, we're projecting out a handful of years here. So if this year the chemistry is there and it's developing and Leonard Williams is becoming a bit of he's kind of he can be one of the vocal leaders for this defense, right? He's a guy that has a lot of NFL experience. He seems to be well regarded in locker rooms, right? Everyone likes him and gravitates towards his personality. So obviously, we think Thibodeau's ultimately the leader of that defense. But if he can be in that mix there, it'll be interesting to see now as year one and then year two, right? It's all predicated on if this team is building towards something. Are these players you would retain? And then listen, what happens long term, right? So both these positions are so thin right now on paper when you look at them. But what happens over the next couple of seasons? Does someone start to show up, step up, and take on bigger roles in the secondary or on the defensive front that makes those decisions look a little bit different? So I'd say sort of ish building blocks potentially, at least maybe here. Let's before we go to the offensive side, then just when we talk about obviously all the draft picks they brought in this year, the younger players, is there anybody that you look inside of this that you think, hey, over the course of this season and going into year number two, maybe for a rookie, this is a player that we can start to, we could say, hey, I think he can be a cornerstone building block for this franchise. And I'll throw out a couple of names that maybe matter most here because we've been talking about what's possible for these rookies. Is Cordell Flott, just on paper, do you go, he can have a strong rookie year and we can start to think there is our other cornerback starting on the opposite side there? Or, sadly, is it like, yeah, we have him, mid-round pick, and ultimately we'll see who we draft over the next couple of years that we think could be the starting outside corner.
Yeah, it's tough because, Aaron Robinson could fit that mold if he has a really good year, just knowing that he's got a
Sure.
year under his belt. I obviously am high on Rodarius Williams. We don't even know if Rodarius Williams is gonna make the final roster, so it's tough to be able to say, is he going to be here long term?
Some
I
people even talked about, and I'm talking about building blocks, just to throw it out there. Someone even mentioned like Jaron Williams, like did play surprisingly well. He's like this back end guy that got thrust into competition and performed admirably. Let's put it that way. And these guys kind of just fall into that spectrum of, hey, let's see what happens now with them in the secondary. But continue.
Yeah, no, exactly. So for me, I don't really see anything yet. It's too early to tell on some of these guys like Dane Belton, Yusuf Corker. Who knows what's going to happen with any of these guys? I think we've kind of understood that it's probably McKinney, the two edge rushers, and take your pick between Adoree Jackson and Leonard Williams. You have 4 or 5 guys, which is half of the defense. I think that's probably good to set your eyes on. Over a year and a half, 2 years, you probably have half of the defense turnover, but those are the guys I think you build with on the defensive side of the ball.
Yeah, and I'm gonna throw in. Listen, I'm gonna put Darian. I'm gonna put my guy Darian Beavers into this mix here. I've done this not before about cornerstone or building blocks. I did it with Carter Coughlin, where I said, I think that he can be a player, a contributor. Never said he could be a building block cornerstone player for this team. But he was taken in the later rounds, and that's what he was projected as. Darian Beavers was considered to be a 4th-round prospect that ended up falling to the Giants in the later rounds. I think that I'm not saying even this, over this first rookie season, if he starts to get himself up there, becomes a significant contributor on the defensive side of the ball. You fast forward a year from now, Blake Martinez is probably gone, right? You're going to see some of these back end guys be gone. Darian Beavers could be going into year number 2 as a starter. And as we work our way through his second season, we could be saying, yes, middle of the defense, right? Has some of that sideline to sideline ability to be the signal caller there in the linebacking core. I think he has the opportunity. This is the, future building block potentially. I think you look at a player like that and you obviously include the Flotts and the Beltons being capable of it, but a lot to see from any of them over their rookie seasons. I think Beavers actually probably has, out of all the young players, he might have one of the best inside tracks to be a building block going forward.
Interesting that Micah McFadden is actually listed higher on the depth chart than Beavers, obviously, probably because where they were drafted, but wouldn't be surprised if it's a coin flip between the two of them to see who ends up taking the starting role in a year and a half's time for the Giants.
And by the way, either one of them, it's like, right, coin flip. I'll take either one to be someone that can do that for them and be happy about it. Offensively, my friend, this is where I think I'm gonna go ahead and just sweep the top 2 right off the board for us. No need to have the discussion. It's going to be Andrew Thomas and it's going to be Evan Neal. Those are the automatic building blocks because they play the bookends of the offensive line. We assume that Andrew Thomas is going to build off a very strong second season and very high expectations that Evan Neal just walks in the door and is basically, top 5, top 10, whatever you want to rank them. We think that he walks in the door and is exactly as advertised for the New York Football Giants. You could say whatever you want about those two. Where does your mind go then next for? Here's a key building block, and we can frame it the same way, right? Or a guy that this year needs to show something, but let's stick with this guy's a building block right now.
Well, so yes, I think we can all agree that Neal and Thomas, bookends, offensive line, are staples for the next few years to come. You feel confident that Andrew Thomas is going to get another deal from the Giants just based on his progression and how he's looked.
Mm-hmm.
It's been great. I think once you get past them, Adam, it's tough because I don't know if there's any singular player that you look at and you have confidence that they are going to be a building block. There are certain guys that will be on this roster for multiple years just based on when they got drafted, how much time they have left, et cetera, et cetera. But in terms of building blocks, I'm struggling to understand who would be the next building block on offense that you said, if nothing else, this guy needs to be here because of X.
Yeah, and I think this is where that's why we say there's your two, and now everything else becomes a question, and so much of it becomes predicated on what maybe happens this year or over the next couple of seasons. If we're talking about some of the young players, let's listen. Daniel Jones, we know what's on the line for him, right? If he has the big year, he's a franchise quarterback for the Giants, and we're all elated, and that makes him a cornerstone and a building block, right? If it doesn't look so good, we get that. We'll quickly do Saquon Barkley because I think this is debatable amongst fans. What should happen? I don't think he's a building block because I don't think you can commit to him on a longer contract, replaceable position, all that kind of stuff. I don't want to trend too negative. I just don't look at him that way. Do you think, for you, is there things that he could do this year and showcase this season where you would turn around and say he's worth $12 million a year going forward for the Giants?
I don't see a scenario where Saquon Barkley, even if he plays well, doesn't get the franchise tag from the Giants, because then at least you're just committing to one more year of a running back who's had injuries. You're not committing to him long term.
Sure.
It would be tough to see him as a building block getting a 3-year deal or a 4-year deal from the Giants, knowing how all of these running back contracts age. You look at, Christian McCaffrey, he's been off injured. You look at Ezekiel Elliott, he is hamstringing the Cowboys in terms
Yep.
of the ability and space they had. They had to let go of Amari Cooper as a result of it. So, yeah, it's tough. I think the shelf life for Saquon Barkley with this team is this year and next year, knowing that you have the franchise tag in the back pocket.
Good point long term about Saquon Barkley or any of these kind of players. But remember, like the Dallas Cowboys ended up having to let go of a quality number one starting wide receiver based on not just Ezekiel Elliott's contract, but everything else that they had to do, the offensive line, the issues, right? Trying to fill needs. Like you don't want to be in that position where paying Saquon Barkley ends up making you have to make difficult decisions and arguably wrong decisions later on because you flat out can't get away from it. So something to keep our eyes on there. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yes. So with the Saquon Barkley piece, I think it's still up in the air. I think every Giant fan feels a little bit of a question mark. But in terms of building blocks, Adam, I have a controversial take here. Maybe I don't know.
What do you say, Kadarius Toney?
No.
Okay.
So I think we can all realize that Kenny Galladay, Sterling Shepard, Darius Slayton, a lot of question marks around those three. Tough to even understand if any of them will be on the roster
Yep.
past this season. There's going to be a lot of turnover, which is why the Giants drafted Kadarius Toney, why they drafted Wan'Dale Robinson. My belief is that I think Daniel Bellinger has the ability to be a building block even more than Wan'Dale Robinson does
Oh,
for the Giants. And the reason why is because Daniel Bellinger's boomer bust, like is his floor is way higher than what I think Wan'Dale Robinson is. Because Wan'Dale Robinson is smaller in size and stature. I'm curious to know if it will translate to the next level of his shiftiness to be able to get out in space. We know that Daniel Bellinger is a tremendous blocker. We know that he has amazing hands. Those two things alone will make sure that you can stick around in the NFL for quite a while. You're now seeing in camp that they're saying he's way more athletic. He
mhm.
was underutilized in college. I think he could be a surprising one where you look at it in a couple years down the road. You say, we thought Wan'Dale was explosive and he was going to be a building block, but actually the safety and the ability to do his job effectively keeps Daniel Bellinger around here longer term.
That's interesting. But I don't not like it. It's a really good poll, right? This is a guy the Giants haven't had that consistency at tight end. He's showing that right now. I think that he is going to end up being, he was graded by Walter Football as a really high value where they drafted him. I think that that's the least sexiest building block you could have said, right? And good. Like the Giants need that. The Giants historically have had players like that. So I'm all for it. I'm all for it. And I think I was going to say Wan'Dale Robinson to me is also right there to be a building block, right? And I know you talk about, well, the shift, can he do it, whatever. Again, when you go back, you watch this kid, he's lined up at running back, he's played all over the field. This is what the NFL is built on these days. Like, I think that he is there to be that. And he's obviously the safety valve on what happens with Kadarius Toney over the next couple of seasons. So I just look at it as the new regime wanted their version of Kadarius Toney just to make sure they 100% had him, and they went and got him at 43 in the second round. So I put Wan'Dale Robinson as a building block, and I'm ecstatic to put Bellinger into that. I think the only pushback, and maybe this is for both of these players, by the way, in the big picture, the pushback on Bellinger would be, yes, I think he can do X, Y, and Z. Do I think that you could find another tight end like that in the draft over the next 2-3 years? Probably, but I'll be perfectly content to say we already did it, right? We already found him. We don't have to worry about it. And I think as long as he shows up and shows consistency, already said, asked the question over on YouTube a handful of episodes ago, is Bellinger going to be the second tight end on the depth chart week 1? Overwhelmingly, fans believe he will be. So if he's number 2 on the depth chart in his rookie season, making plays, showing up there, by year number 2, he could be the starter. And that means that over the next 2-3 seasons, you're projecting him to have healthy contributions and be in line to get a great second contract and be a building block. So I love it.
Here's a question I have for you. You mentioned Wan'Dale Robinson over Kadarius Toney. Who has more talent between the two of them?
No, Kadarius. Well, again, here's the thing. Kadarius Toney innately has more talent. I think he's a naturally more gifted player, projected to go higher. Now, again, I will say, Walter Cherepinski, he said that they had Wan'Dale Robinson in the first round in some of their mocks as they got closer to the draft. For whatever that's worth, I think we've now seen the NFL sample size of Kadarius Toney. We know how electric he can be. We don't know yet what Wan'Dale Robinson converts to at the NFL level. It's only going to take us seeing him on the field and seeing him showcase a different version of skill sets for us to go, oh, he's just as valuable. He's just as talented. I put him above Kadarius Toney because he's this regime's draft pick, and because are you going to, as you come up on Kadarius Toney's second contract opportunity, are you committing to him, picking up the 5th-year option, right? Will he be here beyond that first contract? I think both of these players can showcase it and be the 2 cornerstone wide receivers for what you want to accomplish on offense. But I'm going to lean towards the guy that I think this regime specifically wanted to go get, right? They believe they got incredible value bringing in Wan'Dale Robinson.
The reason why I ask is because there seems to be question marks with both, at least for me. One on the Wan'Dale Robinson side is, does his skill set translate to the next level? Like, does his size and stature allow translation? The Kadarius Toney piece is, will he be around here? Will he be on this roster? Like, with all the off-field stuff, previous regime, just concerns,
Sure.
not necessarily about his athleticism, like, which is a bigger concern? Wan'Dale's translation or Kadarius Toney's other things other than his traits and characteristics that make him an explosive player? It's fascinating that you chose, Wan'Dale, knowing the tiebreaker goes to the team, the ownership and GM and coaches that actually drafted him.
Yeah, and I think that Wan'Dale is going to showcase that he can be reliable and consistent as a player, not on the field, off the field as well. And again, I don't want to I'm not dumping on Kadarius Toney, right? We all want him to just show up here, be ready to roll. It just feels like, right? There's this scenario that plays out where Kadarius looks electric and also maybe wants the really big payday and that really big second contract, and it just doesn't align with where the Giants are going to be and other players are going to be paying. And that's 3 years down the road from now. We don't have to get overly hyped on it. But I believe in Wan'Dale Robinson. Beyond that, man, like you say, it's a tricky one to look over this roster and think about what could be. I don't know. I'll put out a sleeper one for you here. Going into year number 2, going into next season, I'm going to go ahead and put my name on the line for Joshua Ezeudu. I think that he's a player that if things go right in his rookie year, we'll have talked about him maybe starting a handful of games at the back end of the season and being a starting offensive lineman. And then arguably you'd be saying, hey, 3 of our building blocks are right in front of that QB position at some of the most critical spots. I think that he certainly is capable of accomplishing that for the Giants.
Yeah, you and me have a similar situation where Rodarius Williams might not be on the roster, and I think that he could be one of those guys. Ezeudu may not even start week 1 at left guard, even though he got drafted. He could be one of those guys for you. It's tough. But Adam, I think the easiest way to state this is, at the end of the day, my friend, the good news is we just highlighted that there is at least 4 or 5 guys on the defensive side of the ball. There's at least 2, maybe 3.5 kind of guys on the offensive side, depending on how you feel about Daniel Jones and others, that the Giants can build around. And to be honest with you, a couple of years ago, I don't know if that was necessarily the case. And so you can feel good that, at least 30% of the starters, 25% of the starters are potentially going to be here long-term, with some of these younger guys able to prove themselves over the next year and maybe vault themselves into that category.
Yeah, like you say, 10, maybe there's 10 names here, there's 8 names here we really believe in, but a year from now, we could be talking about 14 names, right? And then another year later, we could say, hey, 16 to 20 guys, half of this roster is really guys that we know are going to be contributors and going to be able to be a part of this team. The dollars and cents are always going to come into play here with which ones you get to keep. And then we'll be talking about in the very positive way, oh, unfortunately, we have to let go of what we thought could have been a building block player because we have so much talent, right? Too much talent to be able to have
Too much
success.
talent.
What a what a dream for New York Football Giants fans. Listen, we wanted to have a little bit of fun getting out the door here at the end of the week. Put some thoughts out there. Get after us on YouTube, right? Are there other guys that you want to see? We know this is projecting out. So who are the young players? Flott, Belton, right? Who are some of those back end guy holdovers from the previous regime? Can they be building blocks for the New York Football Giants? Second contract players. Put it that way when you're getting after us in the comments there. Obviously, subscribe over on YouTube. Get the podcast where you get those needs fulfilled. We'll be back on Monday, breaking it all down, talking about some of these position battles now and where we think the hierarchy is going to shake out over the course of the offseason. And as always, as Andy Makowitz would want, need, and need, and the people know.
As always, let's go big blue.